Now, would it really be the Down to Business podcast if we didn't find a way to make you some money? Darcy dropped all the gems, he gave all the information. I simply facilitated and I asked a few follow-up questions here and there. Now, while we touched on real estate, our favorite industry, there were a lot of gems, there were a lot of concepts that can really be applied to life. Life of a business owner, life of an entrepreneur, life of someone in the corporate world, it does not matter. Knowledge is truly power. But Darcy takes us through his entire real estate journey. How some terms when he was back in the game really didn't even exist to what we know them to be today. How he really navigated his own lane, went through every single aspect you can think of until he really figured out what it was that suited him best. So, I would love for you to find out what suits you best, because I know I will, because I'm ready to make some money. So without further ado, enjoy episode 218, Learn Your Lane. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Down to Business podcast here with Tamar Turner. Look, we have been touching on a particular industry very heavily and hardly lately. I feel like it's been teaching me a lot. I feel like it's almost been giving me a call to action and telling me that I need to get involved in this more than what I'm already doing. And I also want my audience, and I also want the people tapping in and everybody kind of hearing this episode to, obviously we want to educate, but we want people to make money. We want people to be able to invest, be able to feel good about their future and everything of the sort. So I feel like, who we're sitting down with today, Darcy, I feel like he'll be able to, one, not only give us a lot of education, a lot of insight, but I think he'll be able to help too. And I also think with his help, with his education, his insight, he'll probably be able to make you some money. So if I don't have your attention by now, hopefully as we continue to move throughout this episode, I'll pique your fancy a little bit. I'll pique your interest. But before we get into all things, before I let Darcy just take the show away and do what he does, one, how you doing today? How's everything on your end?
I'm doing very, very well. How are you doing?
I'm pretty good. I cannot complain. It was a little gloomy, rainy, muggy start to the day, but we are good now. We made it happen. We made it through. So I will not, and tomorrow's Friday, so I will definitely not complain about that. So I know we're going to have some people tapping in from my side. I know we're going to have some people tapping in from your side, but I also know that we're going to have some newcomers. So people who probably know nothing about either one of us, but want to support the podcast, want to support you, or just want to find out or maybe educate themselves or make some money. So to put everybody on the same page, to bring everybody up to speed and put them on an even playing field, just do two things for me. Can you, one, just tell me what brings you on the Down to Business podcast? Well, one, tell me a little bit about yourself, but two, in that, also tell me what brings you on the Down to Business podcast today.
Sounds good. So my name is Darcy Marler, and I've been a real estate investor for 23 years now, and I've owned a bunch of stuff. So I've done everything in the residential space. So I've done long-term rentals, short-term flips, the BRRRR strategy, condo conversions, land development of various sizes. I've built 50 houses. I've had like 1,000 tenants literally, and I sold everything. I've sold all my rentals. I never got a joy from being a landlord, so I'm right out of that. And now I like just to do with new. I like to build. So I'm right into new construction, and land development is what I focus on now. And I try to educate and teach people that, not everything about real estate just has to be flips and rentals and wholesaling and Airbnb. There's other ways to make money too from real estate. So.
I feel like we have talked about, honestly, I may have to put the stamp that real estate is probably the most covered industry on this podcast. I love it, but I also love it because in everyone who we talk to, everybody has hit on something different. Everybody, whether it just be an interest of theirs, a strong suit of theirs, the business plan or the business model, or just what they like personally. So is it safe to say that what you're involved in, what you're doing currently, from the construction and the development of everything, would that be your favorite side of real estate? Would that be your favorite thing that goes into the real estate industry? Or is it just what has brought you, a lot of success maybe?
No, it's by far my favorite. I think it's telling that a guy that's been doing it for 23 years has sold all his rentals. Like, that should tell you something. Like, being a landlord sucks. It does.
I was about to say, I have not in previous episodes, if people have been tapped in with the podcast, I said to this interviewee that you were probably the first person that told me that they actually didn't mind being a landlord, and actually caught me by surprise. I said, wow, I don't think I've ever had anybody like say that. It's rough. It's a rough, sometimes being a tenant is hard, and especially when you don't have a landlord that may not be as communicative, as just understanding and everything like that. So trust me, you put your hands up, you let it go. I'm right there with you, and I understand. So, all right, I want to rewind a little bit, and then I want to kind of move up and then fast forward. So to rewind, 23 years ago. Let's take it back a little bit. 23 years ago, I was 5 years old. So wasn't really much going on my end, wasn't really doing too much on this side of things. But 23 years ago, how did your How did the interest come about with real estate? What was your introduction to it? What really made you kind of, one, you saw it, it was something that you probably learned about, heard about, maybe talked with some people about, but you decided to get involved with it and then move forward with it. How did that come about?
So, well, I'm 57. So 23 years ago, I was 34. Actually, when I was 15, I got my first real estate book given to me, and that just opened my eyes. I wanted to do this, but I never did until later. I was a computer guy. You know, I don't know what it is about IT, but lots of IT guys end up being in real estate eventually. But so I was actually down in South America for 5 years in the late 90s, Venezuela, Colombia, Mexico, Brazil. Met my wife down there. My kids were born in Venezuela. So I just love it. But I got burnt out. Didn't want to see a computer again. They work you pretty hard. You make good money, but they work you hard. So I said, okay, now's my chance. I'm going to move back home and I'm going to get into real estate. And so that was 2001. And I started doing flips. And then, you know, I couldn't sell a couple. So now all of a sudden I'm a plan B as always. I guess I'm a landlord now, and you turn those into rentals. And then it just kind of just went from there. 23 years later, I've done all this other stuff.
Okay. Wow. So to hear the 15 years old, the book was given, but to then hear almost 20 years later, that's when you kind of really corralled into it and went into it. So 2001, 23 years ago. Wow. What was, to paint the picture for some of us, because 2001, like, we can't really recall. I can give you some things from 01, but I can't really give you a real estate perspective or what the market was looking like and everything like that. So and I could imagine that a good portion of my audience probably shares that same sentiment or somewhere within there. But I know a good portion of them also could tell me what 2001 looked like. So thinking back to that, thinking about real estate, thinking about the market, thinking about what was out there as far as resources and what people could do, what did that really look like from a real estate perspective?
Well, the internet was there, but there was no podcast, there was no YouTube, there was no courses, so everything was still books and tapes. You know, cassette tapes or CD courses was all the way to learn, and everything was just flips and rentals. Right? There was nobody. We called it bird. You know, wholesaling. We called it bird dogging back then. We were just kind of looking for stuff. So wholesaling as a term didn't exist. The BRRRR strategy: buy, renovate, re-rent, repeat, or refinance and repeat. We just called it, instead of fix and flip, that was fix and hold. So it didn't have a fancy word either. So all these things are about fancy words now. You know, interest rates were still, 6%, 7%. But the cool thing back then was that you could actually assume a property without reapplying to the bank, right? So if somebody was in trouble, you could just literally go into the bank and saying, yeah, I've done a deal with this person and you'll be getting your payments from me now. And looking back, I didn't really fully appreciate how awesome that was. If I did, I probably would have bought a lot more properties that way, but because it went away pretty quick. But back in the day, you could do some crazy things like that.
I was about to say, my eyes almost got a little wide hearing that. I feel like that sounds like such a foreign and extinct concept nowadays. Like, wow, you could just, it was that easy. Like, we could just do it that. Yeah. Wow. That's very interesting to hear. But it's also from a education perspective, I love that you shared that, because it just goes to show what element just was not there and how people still had to work and still had to do everything. I even had one of my guys who's in, he does the Airbnb. He does a lot with the arbitrage and helping and just automation. He said, I wish I could do that now. I feel like that would be, I would be buying properties myself if that was the case. But to, hear that there was an element missing, in a sense, there was a certain part of, like you said, the podcast, there was internet, everything like that, but it wasn't the podcast. It wasn't these people, everybody selling a course and everybody involved in some capacity. So it was a lot of these books. It was a lot of this word of mouth. It was a lot of getting that real hands-on experience, which is kind of, it sounds really kind of cool, because it's just like now where I feel like, not necessarily that we're slighted or that it's not there. I feel like it's made it easier nowadays. Like you said, things have become a bit more fancier. Names are different. Things have spruced up. I feel like back then, really getting your hands dirty, in a sense, really showed you the ins and outs of everything that went into it. And it more so gave you a better frame of mind for how things go. One of my biggest caveats that I speak to is the fact that I love being able to connect with real life officers of companies, CMOs, COOs, CFOs, CEOs, because oftentimes when we work for different companies or shop with these companies or interact with these companies, we never see these officers. We more so see the employees, we see the managers, the people who are right then and there. But it's always good to be able to put names to faces and not have to LinkedIn you or look at the company about page or read a bio or anything. But it's good to be able to see people face to face. So now we move forward a little bit. Now, as you started to get involved with things, as you started to realize the landscape and get more comfortable, at what point did you At what point did this really become like a business venture? At what point did this really become a thing where you wanted to kind of hone in, ranching on things? Because, I hear about the part where it got to a point where, like you said, it was just too much. It was overwhelming, country to country. It was just kind of a lot going on, and you didn't want really your hands in that part. But at what point did you realize, hey, I'm ready to go all in. I'm ready to kind of invest in myself and what I'm doing here. I feel like, I'm at a great point of expertise, and I really want to brand myself in this regard.
Well, even before that, I've been self-employed for 31 years now. So even as a computer guy, I was self-employed, not built to be a corporate guy. I'll tell you that. Anyway, so I came back, when I came back home after South America, I was all in. Like I had a little bit of money saved up, and I said, yeah, I'm going to do this real estate thing. And because otherwise the only thing I knew was computers. Okay, well, otherwise I'm going to have to go back to computers, and I didn't want to do that. So, sometimes you're forced to do things with that. Yes, you got a young family. My kids were like 2, 3, and 4 at the time, and now I said, wow, okay, now I got to make this work. So you figure it out.
Got you. So a lot of times too, we start to notice that our surroundings, our responsibilities, what we really have to do, it'll kind of shape how we move and what we do in that regard. So moving from South America, in a sense, moving from different, because I've even been to a place that I visited recently that I was so like shocked, but not really shocked, but more so impressed by the cost of living and the value of land, had to be the Dominican Republic. When I went out there, and I was really just seeing, just how much was available, what was out there, but what they wanted for it. When I finally did the convert, because the pesos, you see all the commas and the zeros, you're like, wow, that's a lot of money. But when you really convert it and you see how much that is, you're like, wow, I could actually what's stopping me from getting that lot right now and building and putting something on there? So were there any big realizations or things that you noticed moving from international to domestic?
Basic, yeah. So I didn't do any real estate down there. So I didn't have any exposure to the real estate down there. So that didn't get me. But what got to me was, like I said, there was no real training other than books, right? So, it was a lot slower. You had to figure stuff out yourself. And when you made mistakes, it was your own money that you're playing with, right? And so, I I was in Dominican last year too. And all these resort places, Costa Rica, all these places, I noticed the development is just around the ocean, right? Main highway, the resorts, then the ocean, but this side of the main highway is still bush, right? So, I'm always kind of thinking, well, what could I do on the bush side of the highway that I don't need an ocean for, but I can still make money? So you see some commercial and stuff. So I think there's a lot of opportunity if you can kind of crack that code to see what's going on there. But I'm always, when I'm on holidays, I'm kind of always thinking about real estate and what I could do. But coming back, it was just kind of learning by doing and getting dirty. And what I always kind of say was, so I was doing flips originally, right? And I had I bought my house for cash, and then I got a line of credit. So that was kind of the source of how I funded my first things. And so, I had enough to buy maybe 2 or 3, single family homes or duplexes to renovate and flip. And then, so my money would be gone. So I always say, well, I'd be buying these things and money's going out the door, money's going out the door, money's going out the door. Finally, I'd sell one. I'd have a little bit of money back. And I'd say, okay, anybody need clothes? Anybody need braces? It's only January, but let's buy the holiday vacation at Christmas time. Okay, we're all good. Okay, then I go buy something else, right? So it's a real, being self-employed in that world is a real up and down, right? And oh crap, this is taking too long to sell. Oh crap, Jesus, so now all my lines of credits are tapped, and various times I was kind of, asset rich and cash poor, as they said. I was a millionaire on paper, but the visa was getting close to where I couldn't buy groceries, kind of thing, right? So a lot of the tight experiences there a few times over the years.
I could imagine, that leap of faith, as they call it, from that from the 9 to 5, the corporate world, to the entrepreneurial, the business ownership. It's faith for sure. And it's, as you said, to be doing that now 31 years. So to go through a fluctuation of just what it looked like back then, 31 years ago. Well, I can't even speak to that. I wasn't here, but 31 years ago, it probably looked totally different. As you said, even from a resource perspective, from a technology perspective, from a AI perspective, from everything. So to now have to go through all of that, but constantly, because I would make the safe assumption, and I'm pretty sure for everybody who I've talked to, they would agree as well. If we were to stay the same throughout that 31, you probably wouldn't still be here to tell that story. You have to adjust, you have to adapt, you have to keep up with the times and figure out what's what and what's going on. So when you got back domestic, when you were here, as you started to target real estate more and everything, was there a particular area of the country? Was there a particular place that you were familiar with that you really wanted to just work with? Did you feel as though starting here or doing this on this part was more lucrative than another? The reason why I asked that too is because a lot of the times the people who I've spoken to, and even who I speak with word of mouth, they're not necessarily investing, flipping, selling, buying where they're located. Sometimes not even on the same coast or in the same, I would say demographic, or even in that same area. So for you, for coming back, for really wanting to dive in a little bit deeper, wanting to make that money, as you said, wanting to continue this self-employment, were there certain places or spaces that you wanted to start in just because of what you knew or what you had heard?
Yeah, actually, well, I'm Canadian, actually. So I came back to Canada, and I'm in the province of Alberta, which is very oil and gas dependent, right? And so it's like Texas light. We got oil and gas, we got cowboys, we got actually we got more guns here than anywhere else in Canada. So we're like Texas light. Anyway, so I came back here. So most of my activities there, but then, we're up and down with the price of oil, right? So again, some more booms and massive busts. And it took me a while to I'm tired of this, right? So now one of the things I always, I've got some Darcyisms, and one of them is, in and out quick. I don't want to be. So that's kind of what turned me off of the rental world too, is I don't want to be in this thing for 8 or 10 years. And, because you've got an exit plan, and then all of a sudden interest rates spike and whatever, right? So that's part of the construction thing too, is that let's in and out in 10 months. So now, since then, you kind of got to get over a little bit of fear. Well, this comfortable. Like I understand where I'm at. So now I'm investing, like in Texas and Florida, like, you kind of get over that, right? And so, but once you do that, if you're not going to invest locally, well, then everything becomes available to you, right? So now you can really open your eyes. So a lot of people, fellow Canadians, would sit there and say, well, okay, if I'm not in Alberta, well, then obviously I have to go to Ontario, where Toronto is, or Vancouver. For me, the entire all of North America is available now. So now I can look at a California. Taxes are too high, much too long to get permits and stuff. Let's stick to the South, the Georgias, the Floridas, the Tennessees, the Carolinas, the Texases, that in and out quick. You've got the land is much cheaper. You got the cheaper labor. So now you can kind of take a global look, but you do have to get over that initial fear of the known, right? Like we all kind of want to. Our first instinct is to invest in locally, what we know, and sometimes either you're at the wrong place of the economy, or basically that strategy, whether it's flips or rentals or construction, may not be working great at that area at that time. So, but once you've got over that fear, then basically the whole world's your oyster. If you want to invest in Costa Rica, now you can. So I mean, so once it's that initial boom, once you get over the hump, that gets you going.
And as someone now who has been the DR, been to Cancun, I noticed exactly what you said, how a lot of what they do is cater to the resorts, catered near that ocean. But there were the times where we were doing the excursions, and you'd be traveling for miles on the highway and you wouldn't see anything. And it would just be land, and it would just be for sale, or buy this, or for lease, so it's very interesting how that setup is. But no, for that fear, as you said. And I feel like it's so universal with any industry, wherever you are, especially with coming back somewhere that you may not have been as familiar with, switching industries, wanting to kind of be on your own. It's that unknown. It's that wanting to just stick with what you know, or what has proven to be your bread and butter. But scared money doesn't make any money, as they say.
Exactly.
It also takes those investments and those risks to be able to, okay, maybe I have to go back to the drawing board. Maybe I learned a lesson from this, or maybe this actually worked out, and maybe, hey, now we can add a little bit more risk to it, but be smarter about it, or be knowledgeable about it. Because we don't want to just keep throwing just risk all willy-nilly. We also want to know kind of what's the game plan here. Hey, if this doesn't go according to plan, what's my negative? What's the worst case scenario? But if this does, what can we do with this? What can we learn from this? How can we propel this and keep that momentum going? So, all right. So, and you even spoke to investing in Florida. I'm based in Tampa right now, so it's really opened my eyes up to all of the opportunity out here. When I used to deliver, so for Amazon, when I first moved out here 4 years ago, it was crazy just to see some of these properties and what people are living in and where they're at and what's for sale and what they need, and just the opportunity. And then as I started to talk to more people within the real estate industry, I said, wow,
So this doesn't just have, because, me growing up as someone who never really, I wouldn't say I never really had an interest in it, but it wasn't really something that was presented to me per se. So it wasn't really something I looked into, that I researched on. I just saw at certain points people were offering these courses, or people were making a lot of money, or I was coming across these ads that people were just, how they do the ads and they just make it seem like, hey, if you comment in one word, I'll send you everything you need to know about how to do this, and this, and you won't even need much. Well, it's a lot more than what meets the eye here. So, moving out here and seeing the real estate perspective, especially I came from up north, Philadelphia to be exact. It felt like a night and day difference almost, as far as like yes, I felt like the opportunity was still there, but I felt like from a Florida perspective, it was so much land. It was so much that you could do out here, and the demand was totally different. So now, as you think about what you're doing, as you think about the track that you're on, what you've been able to do, the experiences that you've been able to have, and even stepping into this field and really, one, recognizing what you were doing, recognizing what you didn't want to do, and recognizing what you kind of just wanted to clean your hands with, in a sense. What have been some realizations for you? What have been some things that, maybe before you stepped into this industry, as you said, when you were international, more so working in the computers and tech, it was one thing. But when you came back and when you were specifically starting in Canada, what were some things that, opened your eyes to this industry? What were some things that you may not have known before, maybe even some misconceptions that as you stepped into this, it kind of completely transformed your perspective?
So, no, that's a good question. So, like I said, I got my first book given to me when I was 15. So that was the early 80s. So I've been watching the real estate education industry for 40 years now. The message is almost always the same. 95% of it is flips or rentals. Lately, we've had Airbnb, few at rent to own, but so for the most part, the bread and butter has been flips and rentals. So I think we've made a mistake as an industry when people come in. If your first weekend seminar you go to is about rentals, well, you're going to get into rentals. If it's about flips, you're going to get into flips. So my advice to people is do some investigation of all the strategies first, and then match that to your personality. What do you like, not like? What are your strengths and weaknesses? What are you good at? What are you not good at? Because there's pros and, unlike the TV shows where it's just you make money and it's all easy every time, right? Like that doesn't actually happen. So, the bad side about rentals is dealing with tenants, and property management companies suck. So you're going to end up doing more of that than you think. Flips is you're always on the hunt. Like you've got to keep your trades busy. So, it's a lot of pressure to find that next one. And it's getting harder and harder with the price of houses going up, right? So, Airbnb, do you want to be in the hotel business? Because that's what you're going to be. Oh, no, I'm going to get a management company. Well, they charge 25%. So there goes your profits, right? So everything's got its pros and its cons. And so take some time before you dive right in, investigate all the strategies, and then say, I think that makes more sense to me. In my case, I just have tried everything, and I like new, right? Like I got tired of dealing with nasty, these 1930s and 1940s buildings that are ready to fall over. Why do we keep fixing those up? Well, because that's all we're taught, right? We're taught the values in the building. More and more with these older buildings, they're ready to tear them down. Don't fix them up, right? The values in the land now. How do we increase the value of land? Well, nobody teaches that, right? So, I was on a podcast last month with another gentleman from Philadelphia, and he was sitting there saying, I've got this 1880 thing I'm trying to renovate it, and it's kicking my butt. And I said, well, yeah, tear it down. And he said, yeah, next time I won't, it's too late in the game now, but next time I will, right? And so, yeah, so what, you got to enjoy this too, right? It's not just about the money. And for far too long, I was just about the money. I didn't like the rentals. I didn't like the flips. Suck it up, buttercup. It's the only way to make money. So you got a family. You're not going back to computers. So shut up and, go with it. No, figure it out and you'll have a lot. There's no reason why you can't have fun while you're making money too.
Anyone who's been following me know that I preach that so much that, there will never be an interview done, or there will never be an episode published or content curated where I'm not enjoying it, where I'm not having fun. The minute that this podcast begins to feel like a job, I got to throw my hands up. I can't be clocking in everywhere, multiple places. But no, I laugh so much about that Philly thing because, man, the buildings and properties there are so old. And like you said, I feel like they just keep trying to renew, refresh, restore. Yeah. Let's tear down. Let's start from scratch. Let's really build this up. I drive past so many different things now that some of it looks like gentrification. Some of it looks like the redlining. Some of it just looks like, wow, why do I have a house full of why do I have a block full of just the row homes? And in the middle of the block, I have this nice studio looking super new. Like it's so funny just how the infrastructure and the landscape is out there. So that's why when you said that, wow, I was like, wow, I know for a fact multiple blocks, multiple areas of the city where it's exactly like where these buildings are just so old, 1700s, 1800s, and they don't want to, they don't want to refine that tradition or just figure out what can work. But I love how you scope and frame the answer of that question, because you basically didn't say that there is a right or a wrong, but you said that there is a due diligence that needs to be done within the industry that you feel like is not being done. That oftentimes people will get the popularity of the flips, the Airbnbs, the rent, the quick and rent, the rent and sell, the buy and flip, but they don't really know everything that goes into it. As you said, if that's all you got introduced to, then that's what your kind of vision is going to be focused on. That's kind of what you're going to emphasize. But hey, if you learned a little bit of this, if you learned a little bit of this, and that, your interest may be peaked different places. And as you start to learn more and get involved into the more, you could open your eyes to something that you didn't even realize, one, existed, but two, hey, if I would have asked myself that 3 years ago, I'd never be in this industry. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to like that. And I feel like that what you gave, that advice of just doing the research within your industry, is universal. I feel like so many times that we kind of just go with maybe the first thing that meets the eye, or maybe what we think is making that money at the time, or maybe it's not really where our true passion lies. And that's when things become exhausted, or that's when things really become like that chore, that drag, because you're not having fun with it, but you like those checks. But what did you have to do to really get that check? And it's just like, oftentimes, are you having fun and making that money, or are you really working to make that money? So I love that perspective, because it lets people know that, hey, while this may interest you, while this may be something that has brought you success, money, everything of the sort, have you even just heard about this, or have you learned about this, or have you opened your mind to that? Because it could, as you said, it could totally change you. And it could be the reason why now, 31 years later, 40 years of education, you're independent. You're doing what you want to do. You're living life on your own terms. And I absolutely love that. So, okay. So we've we've backtracked a little bit. We've moved forward a little bit. And we've also kind of even spoke a little bit about kind of what's going on current day and what you're looking at now. So with thinking about the Floridas, Texas, even the Canadas, the East Coast, the West Coast, the Midwest, everything like that. With the current, I guess, time and landscape that we're in right now, how do you feel about what it is you're doing within the real estate industry? Are you, because I come across so many posts recently about artificial intelligence and about certain jobs that were here that may not be here by 2025, let alone 2030. I hear about so many people just wanting to move to remote or hybrid, or pick up different certifications or skill sets because they feel like, what they're doing is being tapped out in a sense. Is there any fear or apprehension or just second guessing when it comes to real estate and what you're doing now based off of everything that's going on in the world? Or are you pretty confident as we move forward into this industry and just diving into different things?
So I think, going back to what you just said, tools in the toolbox, the more you know, the better you are, right? So right now, most investors, I know how to I know how to fix it up and rent it. I know how to fix it up and sell it. Maybe wholesaling, maybe Airbnb. You got 3 or 4 tools in your toolbox. In this world of development and new construction, first of all, most people don't think it's possible. Most people kind of just think there and say, okay, well, that's just for the big guys on the outskirts of town that are buying hundreds of acres and throwing up 1,000 tract homes. Well, I can never do that. Well, what if you take it down to a single lot, a vacant lot, a scattered lot, or, that 1920s thing, instead of fixing up, knock it down. Well, I don't know what to do. Most people don't know what to do with old, right? Well, if you knock it down, you got a vacant lot. So really the trick is just to learn what to do with vacant lot. And so there's all what I call my micro strategies. So, the first is, there's kind of 3 parts to development. There's the permitting, the entitlement, getting the permits. Then there's the pipe in the ground, horizontal, we call it, getting the land ready. And then there's the physical building. What's great about this world is you don't have to do the whole thing. With a flip or a rental, I have to finish. I can't half finish a flip and expect to make any money. I can't half finish a rental and expect the tenant to live there. So you're used to finishing. Here, I can just maybe find some land, change the zoning or density or the usage, increase the value, and then sell it to the next person down the road. Maybe that's my little niche. Or maybe I like to, get land that's already entitled, and I put the pipe in the ground. Like, that can be larger parcels, but can also be, my very first project was I had one house that was in the 50s or whatever, and it was 1950s. I was going to renovate it and flip it. Person next to me passed away, so I bought that too. I said it's a great time to try building. I've never done that before, right? So I moved those two houses off. I split those two lots into four. Two of the lots already had utilities, so I had to put utilities in the other ones. I could have sold 4 service lots if I wanted to. I went ahead and built 4 new homes, but that's my point is that whatever part of this, there's lots of entry points and lots of exit points, and that adds to tools in the toolbox. So now, I have literally 20 tools in my toolbox where this specific property in this specific state or city, I can do whatever. So let's say, for years, the bread and butter of the industry was taking a house, fixing it up enough to a single family home enough to sell it or to keep it as a rental. After about, 5-6 years ago, that's starting not to work because the prices went up so much. And we're taught that 1% rule, that in order to cash flow, rents have to be 1% of the purchase price. Well, I can still go to an Ohio or an Indiana and find a house for 150 and, rent for 1,200, and that's going to cash flow. Perfect. But the fact that I can still buy it for 120 in 2024 tells me there's no appreciation. So in this world, in the rental world, you're either getting only appreciation. I've seen business plans where we're going to buy this apartment building. We're going to lose money on it for the next 5 years. We're going to lose a lot of money over the next 5 years, but in 5 years, it's going to appreciate so much. The bigger cities, it's going to be worth it. Well, that's like going to Vegas and putting your money on red, right? So I don't necessarily get that. So it depends what you want to do. Geography is a really big thing. So getting back to the Texas and the Florida, and actually I was just in Tampa in the Fort Myers, Lehigh, Cape Coral area 2 weeks ago, just when it was Tropical Storm Debbie. It hadn't turned into a Hurricane Debbie yet. So I can buy a lot for $30,000 in that area. I can build a house, a really nice house, all in $300,000, sells for $425,000, $400,000. So, my costs are, like I said, $300,000. Maybe I do a deal with the builder. I'm actually doing one. I'm building a house down there, cost plus $25,000. So now let's say my costs all in are $325,000. The value is sell on the resale. Let's say $400,000. So there's $75,000. 25% down on that $300,000 is $75,000. So literally, no exaggeration. $75,000 cash in should get me $75,000 cash out in 10 months. So compare that to an 8-10 year hold on a rental, dealing with tenants and toilets, dealing with property management, dealing with rent controls, dealing with this and that. So what do you want to do? I don't want to fight with tenants and toilets and project managers anymore. This makes a lot more sense to old guy Darcy. So, but it's, again, geography. Geography is a really, really big deal. In certain places, what I teach, it's harder because, it could take me 2 months to get a zoning change in this place. And over here, it takes 2 years before you can get your permits, right? Well, we're investors. We want to make money quick. Let's stay in the 2-month place, not the 2-year place, or everything in between, right? So again, it's where you've got all these tools. So now what makes sense in this area where I'm at, or if I want to go somewhere else, sometimes in order to do what I want, I have to go somewhere else. Like it doesn't make sense in a Philadelphia, let's say, or Toronto or Vancouver or San Francisco to try to do larger projects because you're in it for 2 or 3 years before you can get your permit. So so geography is really big.
And that's something I have noticed too in speaking with other people. Sometimes it's not necessarily that they want to work in one area over another, but it's about what'll yield the greatest reward or result in a sense. As you said, there are some places, and I remember even speaking to my guy, Dan Habercost, and he was just talking about a lot of just the zoning and just certain things that you have to know about wanting to put property out here versus elsewhere, or versus like what type of land. He was using so many different terms with me that even as someone not versed in real estate, it was like, wow, I wouldn't have even known to look at that, or I wouldn't have even known to ask about that, or he would just say, some deals close just because you don't follow the necessary ramifications or everything that's involved with it. And a lot of times they try to take you, through the ringer and just up and down everything, and it's too much. And as you said, by the time you really yield that benefit or yield those results, it's years in, and it's after you put in so much legwork, so much money, so much time that could have been elsewhere, and it could have been a quick bam boom, and you could have been done. Anybody hearing the word tenants and toilets, I think will navigate away from that. So I love the way that you put that, because I would definitely stay away myself. So I'm curious to know, and you probably had this inquiry before. So you spoke about getting your first book at age 15. You spoke about just the education that you've gotten over the years and just how you yourself did a lot of due diligence, but there was also a lot of experience that came with that. For someone coming to you who say, hey, Darcy, I'm not 15 anymore. I did not receive a book at said age. I'm very curious about real estate. I feel like there's so much information out there, but I also feel like there's a lot of misinformation out there. Where do I start? Where do I go? How do I really feel out my interest and my navigation through real estate to figure out what will work best for me? How do you respond to that?
So again, it's kind of do an overview of all the different strategies. And just by chance, I wrote a book that talks about, I talk about each one of the strategies, rentals, flips, burrs, all this stuff. And I give you the actual pros and cons. So I'm not here to sell the book, but I do have one. And that was the benefit of that, is because I was seeing on the TV shows, the pretty couple that would go up, and we're going to flip this house. And they walk in and there's a lazy boy that's just, half on its side. And there's a 2x4 in the corner. Oh my God, what a disaster this place is. No, let me show you some disasters, honey. This is nothing. And then they go through it and, oh yeah, we're going to make 600,000 on this one. And no, you're not. Like, it's not that easy. So, so get the truth about the pros and the cons, the good and the bad about everything. And then, like I said, maybe, rentals does make sense. If you're in Ohio or Indiana, rentals make sense all day still, but they don't so much in some of the larger centers, right? And politics, I don't like to get into politics, but typically, the blue states and the red states, the blue states tend to have higher taxes. The paperwork to get anything done is a lot more. They've got the rent controls, they've got the potential, like it maybe takes, like a Washington DC, it not only takes a year to get a tenant kicked out if they don't pay, but there's also a right of first refusal where the tenant has, if you're going to sell the building, you have to kind of throw it by the tenant first. And there's lawyers, kind of shyster lawyers, that'll go around buying those rights, and they'll just be a thorn in your side as you're trying to sell. So, that's what one of my students told me. I don't have, firsthand experience in Washington, D.C., but that's kind of an example of, like adding that on to the rest of the troubles with, a rental kind of portfolio. That's, I don't want any of that. So in and out quick. Let me go down to a Fort Myers or Dallas and build something quick and get in and out. And, and again, you got to watch in the old style of flips and rentals, you've got one unit before and you're renovating and there's one unit after. Maybe you put a suite in a basement. For the most part, it's 1-to-1. Even in the old days when we tore down a house and built a new one, we would just build 1-to-1. In this world of development and new construction, I'm taking acres and I'm creating new lots, so 1-to-many, or I'm taking, I'm knocking down one old house and building an 8-plex. So again, 1-to-many. So it has to make sense business-wise that area needs units. There's a housing crisis in that area. People are moving to that area. The local community needs and wants this. The local municipality and government wants you there. Other places, we don't want you there. Like, it's going to take you, like I said, 2.5 years to get your permit. I've got a student in one of the larger cities that they took 5 acres of land. They wanted to break it up into 5 1-acre chunks. It backs onto a ravine in a really nice, ritzy part of town. And they wanted to build 5 really nice houses and make a lot of money. They're 28 months in and they still haven't got their approval to even subdivide the land yet, right? And it's because the city just doesn't want that. And they're fighting them on every turn, right? So again, kind of, I know our natural instinct as an investor is I just want to go to MLS and buy something. Let me buy something, right? And so no matter what the strategy, the downside, I said there's pros and cons to everything. The downside of maybe this development world is we need to spend a little time and educate ourselves. What is zoning? What is density? What is highest and best use? How do I increase the value of land? Where am I going to invest? Because I always say, like, let's say you're dead set on building a 20 unit apartment building. I have to be flexible on where. I either have to go to where that's already allowed, or have a reasonable expectation to get the approval for that change in a reasonable time. If I'm dead set on investing in this place, in this neighborhood, in this city, well, then I have to be flexible on what I'm going to invest and what I'm going to build, because only certain things are going to be allowed. So there's some flexibility there. And if you come into any of these strategies without a lot of money, well, now I have to be flexible on time, because it's going to take me some time to find the situation where maybe I can partner with the seller. So a lot of things have to come together if you don't have any money. So so again, you got to be flexible somewhere in every strategy. And so that kind of goes into your education as well.
Whoo, that's a gem right there. And I love the fact that while we hit on so many different industries and the insight remains universal, a lot of what you said today, even for someone not in real estate, you can apply this to your life, to entrepreneurship, to business ownership. But I love the perspective that you have too, because it goes from a world where there was not much at your disposal. There was a lot of having to seek and do your due diligence and all that, to now it's about having a lot at your disposal, but having that discernment to recognize what's beneficial to you, what's valuable to you, what you could really use, knowing everything that you know. So in a sense, it's like almost too like the older generations have a bit of an advantage now and it's now the light bulb is starting to come off, because it's just like a lot of what we probably go through that to y'all is nonsense, or to y'all is just extra noise. Y'all can eliminate and extradicate very quickly. Whereas to us, we're probably just a deer in the headlights, or just gazing over certain things like, wow, this might be the next best thing. When for Darcy and the gang, it's just like, yeah, I've been there, done that. It's not really, I'm where I'm at right now because of the education, everything. But it's also very interesting too, because then you bring a different perspective to, as you said, different students, different people who reach out, the insight that's given and everything, which is why I love getting the words of wisdom from people who have been in it for years, even longer than I've been alive, because it's just like you can speak to things that I necessarily haven't had the chance to experience or to go through. So now, before we let people know where they can tap in with you, where they can find you, where they can learn all things, and to y'all, and then y'all, I'm not gonna lie, he kept a little modest. He only talked about one book. He's actually a published author of 4 books. Just to let y'all know, I just had to throw that shameless plug in there. We'll be sure to make sure we drop all that in the episode. But before we close things out, before we let people know where they can find you, tap in with you, and just follow along this journey too, do you feel like there's anything that we haven't touched on today that you want to leave the people with, whether it be business owners, entrepreneurs, people working in the corporate world, people looking to get into real estate, people already getting into real estate? Is there anything that you have for them?
I always say, don't skip leg day. That was my people ask me about real estate. So, I make a joke, but basically it's like, like you've got to be kind of well-rounded and learn, like I said, put more tools in your toolbox. There's a lot of people selling a lot of stuff, and I'm a guru too. I got a course, but make sure they got gray hair. Make sure they just haven't been investing for 2 or 3 years. Have you seen a few ups and downs? My first house I bought personally when I was 20 years old in 1987, and the interest rate was 12.5%. And I thought I got a deal, because in the early 80s, it was 14, 16, 18%. I thought I was rocking. I thought this was awesome. Funny story, I saw and I went variable. I didn't want to lock it in fixed. And so for me, 10% was the baseline. I'm variable, but once it gets below 10%, I'm going to lock that in, because that's magic there. A few years ago, I'm in a Starbucks, and there's two, young couple, and they're talking, and they're arguing between themselves whether they should go fixed or variable. And it was like 1.5% versus, 2.1%. And I just want to slap them upside the head. And I say, it's free. It's free money at this rate. It's free. So again, a little perspective. And now it's up, to 5, and that's back to 4.5. Oh my God, what are we? Well, that's normal. For most of the 80s was nuts, fine. But for the 60s and 70s, the 90s, the early 2000s, that 6-7% was kind of normal. And, we kind of got through it. And so the 1.5, the 1.9%, that's the unicorn. That was the really weird one. So, again, perspective and age and gray hair kind of gets you into that. But just try to learn as much as you can about different things, and then go with your heart and say, I think I'm going to like this part of investing. And if it's flips and rentals, perfect. I don't see it, but whatever. And but if it's new construction, land development, like I said, I was in Texas. I was the end of last month, beginning this one. I was in Texas and Florida for 10 days, and I just met developers and builders. In Texas, for example, I met a guy that his bread and butter was he found like 40 acres, subdivided them into 3 or 4 sub lots of whatever, 10 acres each, and just sold that. $200,000 profit in 3 months, literally, right? And just in and out quick, right? didn't have to do with all the stuff. I gave you the story about the housing in Florida, almost double your money into, I just did I have a YouTube channel. I just did a video where I gave 33 examples from my tour of different ways that people are profiting from construction and development. And it was, 12 out of the 33 you could get in for less than 100,000. All of them were in and out in less than 20 months. The vast majority was in and out in a year. Double your money, potentially double your money in 2 years or less, earn 50 to 100,000 a year for the rest of your life kind of thing. So there's lots of opportunities here that maybe don't exist in the traditional flip and rental and wholesaling and Airbnb. So anyway, that's
what happens. You see what happens when y'all don't skip leg day. You have some skin in the game. You're able to talk about some things like that. So no, Darcy, just to hear the journey that you've had. One, it's motivating, it's inspiring, but it's also one that goes to show that you really put in the groundwork and you put in the foundation, and you can speak to the multitude of success and then some, because I know that this is only scratching the surface, as we call it. Looks can be deceiving, age is just a number. You have a lot more things coming for you for sure, and I'm very excited to be able to see that, and also have the people tapping into this episode be able to follow along that journey just the same. So before we officially close things out, arguably the most important part, you've said a lot today, you've even gave some call to actions, but I think this is really the biggest one, because this really separates those who are just listeners versus the doers and versus the action takers. So for the people out there that are just looking to tap into the course, tap into what you are doing, connect with you in any way possible, from social media to websites or everything, what are the best places to reach you? Give us everything you got.
So you can just go to the darcymarler.com. That'll get me to as well. And then the other place, if you haven't thought about this at all, like construction, that's one of the things I get all the time is, Darcy, I didn't even know this was possible. I just been taught flips and rentals all my life. I've got a YouTube channel, so just go Darcy Marler YouTube and you'll find me. And I've got like 140 videos out there of just this, like nothing about rentals and all that. So if you want to dive down the rabbit hole of that, go ahead. And yeah, I find that the other thing too is people are drawn to gurus based on personality and based on, I'm tired of flips and rentals too. And I'm tired of, I want to get in and out. So certain people are going to be drawn to a Grant Cardone with the jet set and, I've got a mansion on Star Island and all that. Other people, they're working hard on the circuit. I'm going to be in Dayton next week, and follow me in Akron the week after. A lot of people are attracted to me just because of the gray hair and the calmness. And we'll figure this out. And, I'm here for you. And so, yeah.
I love it, man. I love it. I'm so grateful, like I said, for you. One, just wanting to be on the show, just for the enthusiasm, but today really just for the insight, for the education, and just for even the perspective that you gave today. As I said, as I spoke to, I don't really feel like you gave a right or wrong today. You just allow people to you just allowed the facts really to speak for themselves, and allowed your experience, what you've gone through. You have skin in the game. You've done leg day time and time again. You've been in this for a multitude of years. As I said before, I was even a thought to be on this earth. So the fact that you were able to just impart that knowledge on myself and my audience, I'm very grateful for that. I'm appreciative, but I'm also just wanting my audience to, take advantage of this. As I say time and time again, we are connecting with real life experts. We are connecting with people who have that skin in the game, who haven't skipped leg day, who have done what they needed to do to be able to speak to what they are. But, they're not done. They're also letting you know that while you're seeing kind of what I'm doing in real time, you're seeing what I've done. Oh, there's so much more on the back end. There's so many things coming, because as long as the world is changing and adjusting and adapting around us, we have to be able to do the same. So a big shout out to Darcy, a big thank you just for everything that you did today. And I'm very excited to just continue following along this journey. And then to everyone who tapped in with us, whether you joined us live here for the session, whether you're catching up to this episode at some point or in some form or fashion, I thank you. I love y'all. This has been another episode of the Down to Business podcast here with Tamar Turner.